Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books, and you know I've been covering Disney fairly closely these last few months. There's a lot been going on at Disney with Bob Chapek being kicked out and Bob Iger coming back into control as CEO, but there have been shakeups on the board of directors, and now Nelson Peltz, who pretty much is an expert business changer, who gets results when he goes in and starts working with companies as an investor and as an advisor. That's a new thing. Nelson Peltz is probably going to make some significant change happen at Disney. I did a couple of videos about this already, but I'm doing another video about it because even though there's not a lot of news just yet, having researched Nelson Peltz, I've come to find out he's done a lot of this, even more than I realized. I already knew something about him, but what I've learned is he's done this move more than 30 times before with significant companies, where he's contacted the company, he's talked to the board of directors, he's talked to the CEO, he's explained, listen, I have some ideas for your company, we've identified your company, and it's not just Nelson Peltz, he's got a whole team in his hedge fund that's specialized specifically in this, targeting companies, identifying opportunities, and saying, look, you guys have got some management issues. What's also really interesting is that some of the issues that Disney has, that Nelson Peltz has identified, are truly related to the whole woke culture structure in two specific ways. First, Peltz has specifically identified that Disney's flywheel is broken. Now, in business, a flywheel is a common term that starts to get used in business and business management circles. There's a really great book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And there's another book called Turning the Flywheel. And the concept of a flywheel is you put resources into a certain business model or business strategy. In Disney's case, if you can look at the great old days when Marvel Phase 1 had started, for example, and Marvel's first film was successful and the story continued. The second movie was successful. The third movie was successful until it all wound up building into that crossover. All the energy gotten and created and all the exposure from one project leading to exposure for another project, leading to exposure ultimately for a great crossover project that incorporated all the fan bases, and it felt like it was one thing that just kept growing. Similarly, in the entertainment industry, if you look at the Conjuring franchise, and I'm going back through all their films right now, it's really fascinating how that was structured. The horror franchise, The Conjuring, the movies are related and one spins off another, an incredible, incredible industry where one successful film can then lead to multiple spin-offs and sequels. That's a flywheel. Another aspect of the flywheel is all the licensing business that Marvel is able to generate and all the interest in the characters and the obvious buildup in brand equity when they were doing the characters the right way, when they were close to what was intended, when the characters were originally created, and they kept the interest of the superfans, the core customer group. Peltz is very sharp with consumer-facing businesses. He understands what interests people, what doesn't interest people. When he was on the board of Procter & Gamble, one of the things that he pointed out was they had all of these big name brands, but millennials were interested in small brands, in little micro brands. And P&G already had, more than 100 of these brands, which to focus, they collected and sold, which Peltz thought was the wrong thing to do. And he was later proven right because people are just buying things and consuming things differently than they were back in the day. So Peltz has done this kind of thing where he's approached these companies and really gotten results. In the Procter & Gamble proxy fight, he was trying to get on the board of directors. And why does he want to be on the board of directors? You get a very big say and a vote when decisions are made in the company. It also makes it harder to hide because when you have someone who really knows what they're talking about from a business standpoint, it's not about entertainment. He's not going to decide this movie star should play Thor versus that movie star should play Thor. What he is going to say is, what are the fans saying about the content we're producing? How is all the downstream flywheel revenue going? What energy are we creating that is spilling over into other aspects of our business? How does the streaming business support our theatrical and our licensing business? You don't need to be an entertainment guru to ask those kinds of business questions because the concept of the flywheel exists in my business. It exists if you're in business. It exists in your business, even if you're not aware of it. It's the engine, the thing that makes your business unique and special and able to grow, especially grow organically, like by word of mouth and success. If you want to know more about the flywheel concept, get the book Good to Great. And also, if you're very interested in it, get their other follow-up book, Turning the Flywheel. Fascinating business books. Iger obviously doesn't want to give control of any sort or vote of any sort or get feedback of any kind from Nelson Peltz. But the problem with Nelson Peltz is he's extremely well respected. I thought he was well respected. I had seen him in some interviews before. I had seen some negative things about him just with respect to how he got into the business originally. It was his father's company. He had built it up. It's not that he didn't do anything super special. You know, was he a business genius? Probably not. But he really has come into his own as this activist investor type where he approaches these major public companies and he gets change. I mean, it's incredible, even if you think about it, for him to invest whatever they have, $900 million invested in Disney stock, and they're making a big problem for Disney now. And even with their stock being so depressed, it's still more than a $100 billion company. It's a significant company. But it's very difficult for Disney to dismiss Nelson Peltz. And they can try to, but the problem is the other shareholders notice. But it's more than that, because even if Iger is able to keep Peltz off the board of directors, it's interesting because Peltz was just talking about this in an interview I saw earlier with respect to DuPont. And, you know, he was being voted on the board of DuPont, very gigantic, old, classic chemicals company. And before the vote was complete, you know, even then, it was years ago, it was still business media news. People were talking about it. And he was interviewed and they said, well, Mr. Peltz, you know, if you're not voted on the board, what's going to happen? He said, look, if I'm not voted on the board, it'll be a loss for the shareholders. And change will still happen. It's just going to happen more slowly. Because when he gets involved, this guy Nelson Peltz, he does not shut the heck up. He just kind of keeps going at it. And you should also know that Peltz knows a lot about Disney from Ike Perlmutter. And he knows a lot about Iger because of Ike Perlmutter. Because Ike Perlmutter is tight with Peltz. And if you remember that name, Perlmutter, he was one of the owners of Marvel who sold the company to Disney and then was frustrated because of Disney's woke direction they started to go in. And then ultimately Perlmutter couldn't fight and really do anything about it. Perlmutter is no weak guy either. Perlmutter came over with no money from Israel and, you know, built his own company up as an immigrant. And he wound up being a self-made billionaire himself. But he doesn't have an investment company. And he also doesn't have the major business profile that someone like Nelson Peltz has. So Peltz is not going to give up. Iger can push back. Iger's biggest problem is this. Iger needs to reestablish some kind of positive narrative. So forget Peltz's involvement at all. Iger is very smooth. He can make grandiose statements about entertainment and creativity. He can have industry people backing him up, which he absolutely would. Just as you saw, China has great connections with Iger. Iger can get more of their movies in China. The couple of days after Iger came back, all of a sudden Avatar was being released in China, which is going to net them a bunch more money. Just because at least it's going to net them an extra $50 million in their pocket, $200 million plus gross in China, whatever it is with Avatar 2. Significant money. It's great for the total gross number. Iger can get people's support. But the problem is Peltz is not going to permit that narrative to build. Disney will not be able to rebuild momentum as, oh, we're this great entertainment company and we love creative people and look at all the industry people supporting us and China supports us and the world loves Disney. No, Peltz is going to keep hitting him. Now, Peltz has not said anything about the company being woke, but he has mentioned the flywheel, which is undeniable. Because if you're releasing movies, you're releasing Marvel movies, well, okay, how is your licensing going for those Marvel movies? We all know that the Marvel toys don't sell. We all know that the Marvel woke characters don't sell. So there's no answer for that kind of a question. There's no excuse for why the flywheel's broken, except for the fact that Disney does not care about what fans really want. All they care about is playing accounting games and pushing stuff down people's throats that they don't want. Now, another aspect to Peltz is, and I heard this in his interview and I missed it the first time, so I heard it again, I'm like, and then he mentioned it somewhere else as well. But in Disney, he wants to, quote, de-matrix the company. Now, when I had heard that expression, it's not in my world. I don't really hear about matrixing and de-matrixing companies. And I had some good questions about that on a prior video that we did. I want to do a little bit more research on it and mention what that is, because this is a fundamental change that Peltz will be pushing for to happen at Disney. Just because Peltz gets on the board, it doesn't mean that this happens. If Peltz doesn't get on the board, it also doesn't mean that this is not going to happen. But Peltz has already directly attacked Iger for having way too much overhead and way too much expenses. And that is something that is born out of having this matrix organizational structure. This is where the woke stuff really breeds and lives. A matrix organizational structure is a combination of two or more frameworks, such as a functional management and project management. In its simplest form, this is all you have to know. In its simplest form, a matrix organizational structure comprises two chains of command, one person reporting to two supervisors. So every person has two supervisors because they consider the work that you're doing relevant to more than one part of the company, which theoretically, okay, it's fine. There may be some companies that can thrive in that kind of environment. But the problem is numbers don't lie. Profit margins are profit margins, and comparison companies are comparison companies. Peltz made the excellent example of saying, hey, wait a minute, why are you in the same business as Netflix? You're losing billions and Netflix is making money. And I've got news for you. If you Google like Netflix net income, it doesn't say that Netflix is losing billions of dollars because they're not losing money at Netflix. They are at Disney in streaming a tremendous amount of money. They lost just $4 billion last year in streaming, a total of $11 billion since they've started the streaming business. And they've probably lost more than they're actually reporting because of complicated accounting trickery, which Nelson Peltz does not talk about, but I promise you he knows it a lot better than I do. He sees the numbers, he knows the feel for the numbers, and his people know this. Again, they've done this more than 30 times before with other multi-billion-dollar companies. There's no games, no smoke that's going to get played. And as far as I can tell, it was interesting seeing him mention Ike Perlmutter in one of the interviews. I have a feeling he's told Ike he will do this. And when you say you're going to do something and it's for a friend and they know, like, okay, this is important to the other guy, you're right, let's solve this because this is bad news, what Iger has been doing with Disney from a business standpoint, but culturally as well. Again, I've not heard Peltz talk about the damage that Disney is doing to the culture. I don't think it's politically correct enough to ever be talked about openly, particularly not by him. He would lose the support of investors that Peltz needs to get decisions made. But Peltz is no dummy. He knows the culture. Ike Perlmutter is no dummy. They both know what the heck is going on, and neither one of them like it. Peltz is also a Trump supporter in 2016 and 2020, although he backed away from Trump and made an announcement he doesn't support him anymore after the January 6th incidents. So where that's going to turn out, I don't know. So that's what's been going on. That's what a matrix organization is. You can certainly read more about matrix organizations. It obviously gets complicated. I don't think you necessarily would need to. This is the basics of what you need to know. You've got one person who's working at a company with two bosses. And you can be absolutely sure that one of those bosses, if you're in any kind of creative role, is making sure that your content is as woke and as can possibly be. And if you're not woke enough, you're not going to be working at Disney. That's what Peltz is going to do. He's going to cut out the garbage at Disney. He'll do it on the board. If he's not on the board, he will make enough noise that he will block Iger from being able to have a positive narrative where Iger's making promises in the future that he can't deliver on. Iger is trapped. Peltz has got him. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Do you see where I'm coming from with Peltz? Have you done any of your own research on Peltz? He's interesting. Listen to his Bloomberg interview. But let me know what you think. Always appreciate your comments below. All right, please be sure you're also subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.